I made this knit skirt at home on my sewing machine, and I'm going to walk you through every step. Hi, I'm Amy, and I've been sewing for as long as I can remember. I love to share the knowledge and skills and experiences that I've built up over that time so that you can come to love sewing and dressmaking as much as I do. I teach in-person beginner sewing and dressmaking lessons in Harrogate in the UK, and I also share sew-alongs and mini tutorials here on YouTube. If you like my content and find it valuable, then please do like, comment, subscribe and share my videos so that other people can find me. So today we're going to be making the Bibi skirt, which is a knit skirt pattern from this book, which is Tilly and the Buttons book Stretch. It's a really simple panelled knit skirt, which is really comfortable to wear and very simple to sew. So here we go. The Bibi skirt needs a medium weight knit fabric with 10% stretch. So I'm going to be using the fabric that was left over from my Estelle dress. If you didn't see the Estelle dress, then I've done a sew along for that, and I will leave it linked down below or above, so you can have a look at that. This is the fabric, and we only need 1 metre for the Bibi skirt, so that should be plenty. So design options for this skirt is very straightforward. It's just a panelled skirt, pencil length, and I'm just going to make the standard version. But you can make it a bit more fancy if you like. So there's an option for a split at the bottom of the hem, which you can see here. Or you can make waist tabs, which are quite nice. I have in the past made a version with tabs on and put some nice buttons on, and that just adds a bit more interest around the waistline area. Or you can make it, or turn it into your pinafore dress, and you need to add this bit on the top here. But for my version today, I'm just going very standard and making the straightforward version without the split. It's this one here. So size wise with the Bibi skirt, I'm going to cut out a size 3, as I always do with Tilly and the Buttons patterns. My measurements for reference are 28 waist, so that fits nicely into the 3, and I'm 36 hip. But I always tend to find with this, making this skirt, that that extra inch there is fine. And you can see down here with the finished garment measurements that there is negative ease in this pattern. So that means that the finished garment measurements are lower or less than the body measurements, and that's so it fits to your body nicely. So you can see at the waist, on my size 3, the finished garment measurement is 24 inches compared to the 28 inches of the body measurements. So that's 4 inches of negative ease. And then similarly with the hip, that's the same. That's 2.5 inches of negative ease at the hip area. So the body measurements are 37 for a size 3, and then the finished garment measurements are 34.5. So 2.5 inches of negative ease. So moving on to cutting out my fabric pieces, I've laid my fabric out right sides together. So the right side of the fabric is inside, and this is the wrong side of the fabric. And then this has already been pre-washed, by the way, because it was pre-washed in my previous project. So that's all done. And then we've just got 2 pattern pieces for the Bibi skirt. We've got this one, which is the main skirt panels, and we need to cut 4 of these. So if I lay it down here and then here, then we'll get our 4 pieces, because obviously this is a double layer. And then the other pattern piece is just the skirt waistband, and we need to cut 4 of those on the fold of the fabric. So I'm checking my grain line is the same distance away from the selve edge at both ends. And then laying some pattern weights down to hold the pattern piece in place. And then I like to draw around with a heat erasable pen. I find that that's the most accurate way of marking our pattern pieces before we cut them out. So I resorted to using chalk for the second piece, because you can barely see that heat erasable pen on the first bit here. So I've chalked around the second piece, and I've also popped some pins around the edges of both pieces, and that's just to keep both layers together and in place when I'm cutting out with the scissors. So for this waistband piece, I've just folded over the edge of my fabric. So this is the selve edge and this is the fold. And I've just made sure that it's the same distance all across, in the same way that I measure from the grain line to the selve edge, just making sure this strip is all on grain. And then I am taking my pattern piece and placing the section that says on fold, which is this double arrow here, on the fold of the fabric, right on the edge, and then I will chalk around there and then move it along and do that again, and do that 4 times because it's cut 4 on fold. So now our pattern pieces are cut out. So I've got 4 of the main panels, main skirt panels. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I've got 4 of the waistband piece. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So before we move on, I just need to snip the notches into these pattern pieces so that we know where to align each of them. So what I'm going to do is slide the pattern piece back on top of each one of these pieces separately. I'll do them separately so that it's a bit more accurate, and then snip in by about, I don't know, 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch where the notches are. So there's a hip notch here, and then there's a notch down there, and then on the waistband piece there's a notch on the top edge, and then 2 on the bottom there, 1 on the side. So I'll snip into those into my fabric pieces before I start sewing. Okay, so the first sewing step that we need to work on is to join 2 of our main skirt panel pieces together along one of the long sides. So I've laid one of my pieces down right sides up, and we just need to be careful that we're getting the waistband end at the same end on all of our pieces, because they do look fairly similar. You can see this end has got a curved element to it, whereas this end is straight. So we know that this is the waist and this is the hem. So now we take one of our other pieces and we lay it right sides together on top like this, align this long edge here, matching the notches that we made earlier, and then we're going to pin all the way down. Okay, so I'm now at the sewing machine and I have got my jersey needle in my sewing machine. So we need a jersey needle so that we don't create any snags in the fabric. The jersey needles, rather than piercing the fabric, they part the fibres, and that stops the fabric from becoming snagged. So jersey needle in the machine. I'm going to turn to my zigzag stitch. We need to knit fabrics with a zigzag stitch so that they stretch as you wear them. And the pattern recommendation is that the zigzag is 2.4 to 2.5 long by 1 to 1.5 millimeters wide. So I shall set that on my machine, and then I will sew with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that's our first 2 pieces joined together along this seam here. And now what we need to do is attach our third panel. So I'm going to open these out so that the right sides are showing. And then I'm going to place my third piece on this free long edge next to me here, and then just repeat the process that we went through just now. So aligning the raw edges, aligning the notches, and pinning all the way down, and then sewing again at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we have attached 3 of our panel pieces. So we've got a seam here, got a seam there, and we can see all 3 pieces sewn together there. So finally we need to join the 4th piece and make this into a tube. So I'm getting my 4th panel piece here and just repeating what we did earlier. So we're aligning the raw edges, aligning the notches, and sewing this seam with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And once that's sewn, then we want to join this edge up with the one here. So we'll fold them right sides together and then just repeat that one more time. So align the notches and sew all the way down to the hem, and then we should have a loop or a tube, and that's the main part of our skirt sewn. So now our skirt is a full tube. We've sewn all 4 of the side seams, and now the next step is to trim each of these seams down, probably by about half their width. I'm just taking my scissors and snipping down, removing some of the bulk from each of these seams. So I'll do that on all 4 pieces, or all 4 seams I should say, and then I'll take it to the ironing board and press them open. So we're now moving on to constructing the waistband of the skirt. So we've got 4 waistband pieces, 2 that are going to be the waistband itself and 2 that are going to be the facing of the waistband. And the instructions tell us to trim down the 2 facing pieces along this top curved edge by about 1/16 of an inch, which is a teeny tiny amount, and that's to help the facing of the waistband roll inside so it can't be seen from the outside. So I've just started to do this one here, and it's literally just this tiny amount that we're trimming off on 2 of these pieces. So now what we need to do, now that we've trimmed the top edges of 2 pieces, we need to place the trimmed pieces right sides together like this, pin down both side seams, and then sew at 5/8 of an inch. And then we need to do exactly the same with the untrimmed pieces. So lay right sides together, pin down these short edges, and sew them together at 5/8 of an inch. So that's both of those sets of waistband pieces sewn at the side seams with the zigzag stitch. Now we need to trim the seam allowances down by about half, as we did with the main skirt pieces. I'm going to do that now, and then I'm going to press these seam allowances open at the ironing board. So we're now taking our waistband piece and turning it right sides out and slipping it inside the facing piece, which is still wrong sides out, like this. And then we're aligning those top edges, aligning the notches, and then pinning around this edge here. So there are notches. So right sides are together. And if you're struggling to work out which is your facing and which is your waistband, then just have a look at the notches. So on the facing, your notches should be very slightly smaller because of that 16th of an inch that you've trimmed off. So that's the way that I worked out which was which. So we now need to pin all the way around this loop, all the way around there, and then stitch that at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I've now sewn around the waistband loop, as you can see there, with a zigzag stitch. And now we need to again trim these seam allowances down by about half of their width. I'm just going to snip in there and then trim all the way around. And then once that's done, I need to press these seam allowances open. So now that's pressed, we need to turn the waistband so that the wrong sides are together. So the wrong side of the waistband and the wrong side of the facing. and then press all the way around, rolling the facing so it's very, very slightly inside the top of the waistband, like that, and give it a nice press with the iron. Right, so we're now on to attaching our waistband to our main skirt piece. So my skirt is right sides out, and I folded it so that the centre panel is in the middle and the two side panels are basically sort of folded in half, like you can see there. Now I need to slide the waistband over the top of this waist opening, like that, and then the side seams of the waistband should match up with the middle of the side panel. So we're grabbing the 3 layers, the waistband, the facing, and the top of the main panel of the skirt, and then pinning all the way around, matching notches, and as I say, the side seams are in the middle of the side panel. This is what it looks like all pinned. So the waistband is attached to the top of the skirt panels, aligning the 3 raw edges and pinned all the way around that circle. So I'll now take it to my sewing machine and sew around here with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that's the waistband now sewn to the top of the skirt all the way around in that loop. And if we flip it out, and that's what it looks like. And you can see that it's sort of centered over this middle panel. And I should have said earlier that you can select any of your panels really to be the middle panel. It doesn't really matter which one. So that's what it should look like. So now if we flip it back, we just need to trim these seam allowances down by about half, like we've done with all the other steps, and then press them down towards the skirt. So press them that way. So all that remains to do now is just hem the skirt. So I've actually tried this on in the mirror, and I quite like the length as it is without hemming it. So I'm going to ignore what it says in the instructions and just turn it up by a 1/2 inch. So the instructions say to turn up by 1.25 inches, but I'm just going to do that 1/2 inch because, as I say, I quite like the length as it is. So I'm going to take my sewing gauge, move it to 1/2 inch, and then at the ironing board, press up 1/2 inch all the way around, pin it in place, and then sew it. And there's the finished Bibi skirt. I didn't attempt to pattern match the panels across the skirt, but I quite like it like that. It's just a really straightforward, comfortable skirt to wear, and I've made several versions before, and I know I'm going to get lots of wear out of this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.